Okay. Welcome to Road to Recovery. You're here tonight. Luke and I do this monthly webinar for couples who are trying to heal from any type of infidelity or sexual addiction, and give you a place that the two of you can come together, ideally be able to come together, both be able to hear the same topics and have tools to help you heal. So tonight, like always, we have a topic that we bring. We start with a little bit of just a foundation of a tool, and then from there we move into general Q&A. A few pieces to this is that we ask that you use the Q&A to put any questions you have in the Q&A. And if you have certain questions, putting them in sooner than later is highly recommended, because usually we finish each one of these with a handful of questions that we just don't have time to get to. So also, I think tonight's topic will probably bring up a lot of questions because it's just a hot topic. We've talked about this before in the past, and we're going to talk about it again. And tonight we're talking about shame. And the reason that we talk so much about shame, or why we want to make space for that in couples healing, is one of the key components to helping a relationship heal after we have a betrayal is there needs to be empathy from the partner who betrayed. But shame is one of the number one things that blocks empathy. So we really want to talk about shame, how it comes up, ways that it shows up, ways that it hurts a relationship, and ways we can work through it so the relationship can heal. So logistics. Luke, did I forget anything?
No, just a friendly reminder, like you already said, to put stuff in the Q&A. And if you could please not use the chat function. And if you do send something to us, just make sure that it's written as a question instead of a comment, so that way make sure we get to it.
Also, I will plug really quick a couple of different things. We have on our website something that it is a place for resources that happen of events that happen in the community. So we put on there not just things that Choose Recovery Services offer. We have lots of things that we offer, but also if there's retreats happening, or there's good podcasts, or there's apps that we feel like could be beneficial, we put all of those things on our website under resources. And when people in my groups come and say, hey, this is really great, I will share that with our community. So jump on there, chooserecoveryservices.com under resources. And there's lots of cool tools and things in there to help you heal. Also, Choose Recovery Services has a betrayal trauma group. So women who are healing from betrayal trauma and men who are healing from betrayal trauma. We have a group for men and then groups for women. We offer betrayal trauma groups that are totally free for the first 3 months. After that, there's a weekly charge, but you can come and get that support every single week and have people around you to help you through this. Our groups for those who have betrayed, those are running. We have them for people who are in the beginning stages of really just trying to get a foundation of leaving behind those old problematic behaviors. And then we have groups for higher level for men who they have some stability with leaving behind old behaviors, but they're really trying to tap into their own emotional health and why did they go outside of their value system and how do they heal their relationship. And that group, I see so many programs out there that miss that really, really important key component of that, the men's emotional health and the why behind why we go to what we go to that's outside of our value system. So that's the 180 group. And then the 90 group is for those who are leaving behind the behavior. So I plug those because having that group support can be so beneficial in your journey. So all that being said, Luke, I'll turn it over to you to get started on the shame piece.
Hey, Alana, will you check and see if maybe our site is down? I just tried to log on there so I could share the announcements and see if that's just a my computer thing.
Sure.
And then maybe Allie will be able to help just in case people are wondering. Okay. So a lot of the content that we're going to talk about today is from Brene Brown. Specifically the book, I thought it was just me, but it isn't. And to touch on some of the stuff that Alana said about shame, I remember leaving probably about 3 sessions in the beginning of my journey with my CSAT therapist, and I called Alana and I'm like, and I wanted to have this conversation that was, wanted to have this conversation about why in the world did I experience this emotion, this thing that made me want to hide and not tell anybody about what was going on. I'm like, why would that even exist? And for me, because I was spiritual, a lot of my journey was faith-based. I was like, why did God create an emotion that would prompt me to hide? And I was just like obsessed with what is this feeling all about. So Brene just shines a really good light on it. So there's a few principles that I want to share with you. So first one is shame is a confusing and painful emotion caused by rejection at sensitive times. So I'm going to speak a lot today from I'm going to say man, like we do here. That's the person that experiencing the compulsive behavior. So the thing to highlight at first is if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, you can Google it and there's a pyramid on it. One of the most fundamental pieces is there's a community base to it, to our survival. Like if we don't find other people, we won't be able to survive our experience. If we're going solo, it's going to be tough to survive life. So from a foundational level, acceptance is such an important thing. So our brain naturally will search for things where there's disconnection and a lack of acceptance. So what we'll do is it'll highlight that and it'll say, okay, whatever it is, survive, don't share this. But the problem is addiction compounds that problem, especially if you've had a life full of people not explaining sexuality to you and just saying no, and it's been something that's been pushed down. So defining shame is I am bad versus I did something bad. I just want to repeat that. So if we define shame, it's I am bad versus I did something bad. One of the 4 faulty core beliefs of an addict is that I am a bad and unworthy person. And if people truly knew me, they wouldn't love me or accept me. Those are 2 of them. So what we find out is the men that come to our groups, it's not about becoming shame proof. It is becoming shame resilient. So it's not about I'm never going to experience shame. It's that I notice it when it comes up and I'm going to do something about it. Alana, it looks like you're going to say something. Did I read that wrong?
Oh, no, well, no. I was just thinking of that concept of that is exactly right. Is sometimes we have this false belief that the goal is that we have no shame and the shame is just magically gone. But yes, that would be wonderful to never have shame. But part of our human experience often is there will always be some levels of shame. So I just really liked that you highlighted that the goal here is to become shame resilient. And I think that the goal here is to work through our shame and to figure out what is really triggering our shame. Because, and I know you're going to go into all this in a minute, but when we do our past trauma work, when we really dissect shame, we can absolutely heal a lot of the shame. And still, the goal is not to never have shame again. It's to be able to become resilient and be able to have tools to work through it. So I just appreciated you started there.
And okay, so this next principle, I'm just going to read it, but then I want hopefully everybody here to recognize I'm not talking about the person's betrayed that needs to do this. So let me just read it. So the solution to shame is empathy, understanding another person's perspective without judgment. Okay. So I did not just say this towards the betrayed partner. I'm saying this from a place of one of the most powerful places that somebody with addiction can be is in a group setting. So they can recognize and see themselves. Because one of the things that really compounds the problem of shame is that I'm not enough. I'm not a good person. So the judgment is right there. So if there's judgment, that's going to keep us from connection. And that judgment can come from self. It can also go to other people. So what happens is when we show up in a group and we go, all right, I'm going to talk about the things that I don't want anybody to know about. That self-judgment, the stuff that keeps me in isolation, and then let other people see it. Often men will get a different experience by sitting with others. So that's the empathy piece. So the empathy piece comes from, I'm not giving myself a pass on my behavior, but I am understanding that I've lost my identity and I've lost compassion for myself, and I've really lost self-respect. And a lot of that will come back through the journey of figuring out who I am, which is the number one question that a man asks, which is like, I've made these decisions. I hate myself and I don't really even know who I am. Alana, do you mind commenting on that? Because I just keep thinking about the betrayed and not wanting to put it on them that they need to have empathy.
Well, here's the complex piece of this is at some point for relational healing, both partners are going to have empathy. And for most of you who are today listening, that's not where we're at today. Where you're at today is the person who has betrayed is learning how to first have empathy with themselves and empathy in safe places like a group and like with their therapist or with their coach or with their sponsor, that they can have those empathy in those safe places and they can have empathy for themselves, which then helps them work through their shame so that they can then have empathy for their partner. And when we're doing that relational healing in those beginning stages, it is really essential that the partner who has betrayed is able to get to the place where they can have empathy for their partner and carry that for the relationship across the board. And there will come a day that if we want true relational healing, the partner who has been betrayed will have to come to a place of empathy in their heart. That being said, usually the betrayer wants that from the get-go or wants that way before it is time and we're ready for it. And so that's the challenge is, again, I'm just reinforcing here what you said, Luke, is that this beginning part of them looking to other people for that empathy, but first within themselves, outside of their partner that they have hurt. And I'll say, like, going back to Luke and I's example of our own story, in the beginning, Luke, you often came to me and you wanted my empathy and you wanted me to hold space and you wanted me to see your shame. And it was almost, the shame was, I'm trying to think of the right words, but the shame was almost like a look how bad and awful I am. And then you'll know how really sorry I am. So it almost went to this place of victim mentality, but that caused damage to the relationship, not healing.
I love that. And that's hard to see. It's a little easier to see when you're on the other side of that.
What do you mean by that? Do you mean you when you were in it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Being in it and trying to, I don't think I ever recognized like that I was wanting empathy from you. I just didn't want to be alone in our relationship, or felt like I wasn't alone. Because like, oh, if you can be here wherever I'm at, that's what I was hoping you would be at. And that was incredibly selfish for me to do that because I was the person that hurt you. And there was going to be the part where eventually you were going to be able to see it, but I wasn't in control of that. That wasn't on my timeline.
You made a comment earlier and you said something around being critical. And I want to go back to that because I see this a lot, and I'll hear this in my trauma groups, that the women will say things like, is it normal for my husband to be really critical of a lot of people? And that is, it's interesting to me because the more I study Brene Brown's work on shame, the more I realize that critical mindset of judging others usually begins with this critical of ourselves and judging of ourselves. And then that does spread to other people. And so that is really common. And one way that shame does show up is through that self-judgment and being critical of others. So I just thought that was really fascinating of hearing it in my groups, but then actually seeing research-based information that says, yes, that often is a form of shame. Is so if you're listening to this and just noticing me or my partner tends to be really critical of others, that could be an area that shame is showing up. And then we want to get curious. I won't jump ahead. But what we want to do is get curious on that of why.
Yeah.
Why is that judgment showing up, and what of our own shame is that triggering into?
So, okay. So then you have, let's talk about for a second, the second leg of the journey for men who are experiencing shame, which is the sobriety piece. Like I hate me, I loathe me, I'm a pile of crap. And then what they do is they start to sit with other men and they start to find a little bit more of their identity, but really to gain any traction in their recovery, it's not just sobriety, but it's learning to value emotion. So what they do is they start to recognize, let me read this one. So dealing with shame requires recognizing it and understanding where it comes from. All right. So I'm not going to run from that emotion, but I'm going to learn to value it, and I'm not going to treat it as bad. And I'm going to be able to recognize what happens when it comes up. And so if we think about what, Alana, should I do the story or no? Okay. All right. So I'm going to do this story a little quicker than I have in the past. Alana, by the way, I'd actually love this in the chat because we had a discussion about it. I might have told this story like 4 or 5 months ago. So if I did, please tell me because I would love to know. All right. So there was this time that I started this new job. And at this new job, we were at a convention. And when I was at this convention, it was time for lunch. And there was these food booths around the convention. And I was around new team members. And I was like, I was just starving. I was so ready to eat. So there was this like sandwich shop thing right in the middle of this big old huge building, this convention building. And it was so crowded. I walk up to where they're handing out sandwiches, and I grab one. And I turn around and I look, and there's like several people just like staring me down, like I just did something really horrible. Well, what I didn't recognize is I jumped to the very front of a line of like, I want to say like 40 people, because it was crowded. I didn't know they did that. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh no, this is embarrassing. And I thought to myself, I'm like, well, I guess I better go get in the line. But do I get in the line to grab the sandwich, or do I get in line to pay for it? And all I could think about was the stares of the people. So what I decided to do is I'm like, I better just go get in the original line. And I'm walking, I'm like, this is so stupid, Luke. You're going to get in the line that's to get a sandwich. You already have a sandwich. And I'm walking past people, and I'm like, they are just really, they're mad at me. And I walked out. I walked to go get in the end of the line, and I was so embarrassed. Y'all know what I did? I literally just left the building because I was so embarrassed. And all I could think about as I was walking outside the building was somebody was going to come on a loudspeaker and say, hey, look at the guy that's still in the sandwich. And which wasn't even legit at all. I thought, who was going to see me? So when I walked out of the building, I went and sat in my truck. And I'm probably a few years into my journey, probably like 4 or 5. And as I sat in my truck, I had this I just felt horrible. I'm like, I'm the worst guy ever. Like what grown man steals a sandwich from a convention center? And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I know this feeling. So I pick up my phone, kind of, I wouldn't say out of habit, but I didn't want to be feeling that way alone, because I had such a pattern in the history of doing that. So I pick up the phone and I call Alana and I say, guess what happened? And I'm just like going to get it off my chest. And I tell her, and the first thing that she does, she responds. Alana, do you remember how you responded? She just busted up laughing. She thought it was hilarious. So,
Well, part of the reason my laughing was because of your level of being absolutely embarrassed and mortified.
so embarrassed.
And there was enough trust built that I knew you were going to take care of it. But I could see that you were just dying inside and it was so out of character for you.
Yeah. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, and all of a sudden it hits me. I'm like, oh, wow, I'm not a horrible person. I'm not a bad guy. So anyway, long story short, or a longer story, I'm going to shorten up to the very end. I'm like, okay, all right, I'm just going to take the sandwich. I'm just going to go pay for a sandwich because it was a fairly well-known sandwich shop in town. So I go to the sandwich shop, go to pay for the sandwich. Like, oh, that's so funny. You don't have to pay for that. And I'm like, I just wanted to be done with the situation. Take the money because I want to pay for my sandwich. So what I recognized, to tie this back into the shame piece, was I recognized there was a part of me that did not want to be seen. I was so scared. I made a mistake. My emotions got a hold of me. And I went, okay, what's going on right now? And then as I reached out and shared it with somebody, reality hits, which was, I'm not a bad guy. I just had a crazy, funny experience where my emotions got the best of me. So I'm curious with y'all, when you hear that story, and this is obviously going to be rhetorical, but what came up for you when I shared that story with you? Did you, I kind of want to pause for just a second. I know you're not going to write it, but what came up for you? What emotion, what feeling? So did judgment come up? Did you have empathy? Were you confused, like even about the story, like what's even going on right now? And I'm curious how that all went down for you. So
Hey,
Lana,
can
you
I
look like you're going to
respond
say
to
something.
that?
What's
Yeah.
that?
Well, it's interesting because Luke had mentioned teaching on this tonight and wanting to share the story. And I was like, don't share that story. You've already shared that story before. I'm pretty sure in this setting. So please, somebody tell me that he did so I can be right. But um, but I realized that it triggered a little bit of my shame because I realized even the first time you told the story, and I don't remember where it was, there was this little of like wanting to say, like, he doesn't normally do this. And he's not like wanting to almost clean it up of what does that mean if I'm married to a guy who does this or does this. And so even like as you just told that story, there's this desire of me almost to self-protect because some of my triggers or my shame comes up. So I noticed that even now, that story, like it was hilarious at the time, but also uncomfortable. But that was between just you and me. So I could totally have empathy for you. But then all of a sudden, now that this is public and going out to the whole world, there's these triggers that tap into my shame. And so it's really interesting to just slow down and pay attention and notice what comes up in these type of situations and what it can teach us about ourselves.
Thanks for sharing that, Alana. And I didn't recognize in the moment when I was going to share this story that you were going to go through those emotions again. So yeah, for sure. And it's the experience. Like, I go through and I get caught in my addiction and I'm all embarrassed, but I'm not even aware of my spouse's experience. Right. So anyway, good stuff. You got like this half smile on your face.
Oh, because I was looking at the chat and someone said I remember the story and I was like, sweet. But then a couple other people said it's a new story for them. So
Okay.
I guess
All right,
it's been long enough.
we're half and half. Okay, so let's talk about this, and we're almost going to wrap up the shame conversation. We can move on to Q&A.
Well, I was going to say we actually have questions coming in around shame specifically. So we'll wrap up our prepared. That did not sound like a real word. Prepared part. But we have a lot of good questions coming up on shame.
Yeah, for sure. So here's the deal. Critical awareness is going to give us the perspective that we need. So it's gaining that. So as men go through this journey, what their goal is not to get rid of shame, but what they do is they take this journey from shame to remorse to clarity. So what it looks like is, man, I'm a piece of crap for like stealing a sandwich. Like, what is my deal? What grown man does this? To, oh man, that was kind of embarrassing and annoying, and I just shared it with somebody. And then I'm to a place of like, oh my gosh, this is not that big a deal. Like, it's actually freaking hilarious. So that is my experience moving to clarity. This is not my identity. This is about me being human and having emotions and not knowing what to do with them. So that clarity is important. So as we gain that clarity, what happens is we move from a place of being paralyzed to we move from a place of being paralyzed to a place of feeling immobilized to do something about the patterns in that behavior, the patterns in the shame.
Well, and part of that clarity too allows us to know of how we want to repair what happened, how we want to, in essence, clean up our mess. Because when we're trapped in shame, just like you said, Luke, it paralyzes us. And so when we're in this place of being paralyzed, then often shame is that desire to run and hide and not face it and deal with it. But when we move into that guilt, then we go, oh, I want to do something with this. And then that clarity allows us to know and to have a direction of, okay, in what ways do I want to face this to clean up my mess?
Yeah. Okay. Second to last principle in this. So connection with others is a form of healing, both for us and for them. Think about your best friend. I mean, think about maybe your best friend in your entire life. It could be your spouse, but outside of your spouse, okay? What makes them a best friend is they had the opportunity to see you and you saw them in all of the stuff, in all of the things, right? So that is the ability to be able to be vulnerable with somebody else and have them see all of the parts of us. And this for the men, again, is often done in a group setting because what they do is they show up in group and they say, I must be so broken and so wrong. I must be a bad guy. And they show up and they see these other men that are broken just like they are. And what they do is they go, you know what? They're broken, but they're still amazing. They're still awesome. They're still awesome men. And then it really challenges them because they're like, wait, if they're good, even though they made bad choices, what does that mean about me? And it's pretty cool. And that all happens from the connection piece. Okay, last one. So the lie of perfectionism fuels shame and makes it harder for us to care for others. This part of, and it comes from cultures, it comes from faith, it comes from family, it comes from social settings, which is, if we make mistakes, we make them once and we get over it, right? Or if we do, we just kick the crap out of ourselves, and then what we do is we just never do it again. So the perfection part really, really fuels that shame. And it's about understanding and being able to see ourselves as we fall down and what that looks like. And again, I'm not from an addiction standpoint saying I'm going to condone my behavior or it's okay, as much as it is earlier before slips happen or close calls. We can see the emotions pop up in us and we can see what those look like. And we look at them differently. Alana, the last one is compartmentalizing. Do you want to touch on that? Do you want me to? It's just two bullet points.
I'll just let you touch on that.
Okay. So compartmentalizing, it's a very tempting way for us to cover up the shame, but it's only going to make things worse. So I describe it as like there's a closet and it's full of boxes like shoes, just a bunch of boxes you can put things in. And what happens is all these choices that I make in my life or all these my behaviors, some of them are really painful to look at. So what I do is I put it in a box and put it away and I don't look at it anymore. And then sometimes I pull it back out and maybe do the behavior again. And then all these things go in these different boxes. And addiction makes us think that that actually is sustainable and it actually works. But the thing is there actually really isn't any boxes. Not everything affects the other part of things. It's like you can't numb one emotion. You have to numb all your emotions. Alana, I feel like I slaughtered that. Do you want to clean it up at all?
No. Compartmentalization. A question came in, and the question was, how common is it for the addict's shame or the person who's betrayed shame to be so uncomfortable that they go into denial and avoidance? So common. And I think compartmentalization is one way that they do that. Is it is so uncomfortable that they take it and they put it up on a shelf. And this is why Luke keeps asking me, Alana, do you want to teach on this? Is because I just wrote a lesson for 180 yesterday, all about compartmentalization, because it's such an important topic. is to understand and recognize how we're doing it, and then find ways to start opening up those boxes and looking at them. And that there are healthy levels of compartmentalizing. Like if we are having a terrible time, but we still have to be able to show up and go to work to some degree, we need to be able to compartmentalize that, set that aside so we can do what we need to do. But what happens with a person who is living outside of their value for years or in any type of addiction, the compartmentalization becomes a way of life. Every uncomfortable feeling or most uncomfortable feelings get put in boxes. Bad choices that we don't want to look at or face because it brings up so much shame gets put in boxes. And then they start putting everything in boxes and try to live through this compartmentalization. And what it does is it disconnects them from themselves, from their own emotions, from their own experience, from their own awareness. Really, that's why a lot of people who go through this say, like, I don't even know who I am anymore. And then it also hurts those relationships. So part of tackling the shame is looking at how we compartmentalize and being able to pull those boxes down, open them up, and look through them.
Yeah, I'd say you pull his boxes out and you dump them on the floor and you let him, and you start sorting through things. And that's what can happen on the journey, especially in the group setting. Okay. So just we wanted to highlight shame because it's the number one thing, one of the first things, I guess I should say, that the person that struggles with compulsive behavior does is I'm a bad person. If people truly knew me, they wouldn't love me. And I can't lean on other people. I can't lean on other people because if I did, they'll reject me. So that's what we tackle. So anything else on that, Alana, before we transition to what else came up in the Q&A around this? Anything else?
Yeah. So specifically around shame, is how can I recognize, this is from someone who betrayed, how can I recognize that I'm going into a shame cycle or spiral?
Was that a question for me?
Yeah.
I literally just read something else. Can you ask it one more time? Not the
Sure.
first time we've done this.
Sure. How can I recognize that I am going into a shame cycle or spiral?
Oh, that's good. That's good. I guess I can only speak to my experience and I'll try to think of the other men that I work with, not specifically, and point them out. Shame is I start to feel myself kind of like shrink, like it's like I shrink within myself and I get really small and I start to, it's like a self-loathe or a self-hate, like an embarrassment about myself. And I also start to think that what other people want around me is for me to realize how horrible and bad I am. And it's like, it's kind of like, okay, here we go. You guys ever seen the Truman Show? I love how I ask you this, like you can actually answer me. Okay, Truman Show with Drew Carey, where the whole world revolves around him. He's a person that doesn't even know it, but he's on a reality TV show. I kind of feel like that, like everybody is staring at me and I'm on a stage and I'm doing a horrible job. So that's what I notice. Yeah.
Yes, I see all of those. And I think it shows up differently for different people. I see some people who they all of a sudden try to make it about the other person. Well, you're the one who's doing this, or you're the one who's doing that. They're trying to deflect it back. That can be recognizing of when you're trying to all of a sudden in your brain, you're trying to make it about your spouse. That could be your shame is being triggered. Defensiveness could be a warning sign of you might be going into a shame cycle. I love that you said embarrassment, self-loathing, those, and it will look different for each of you. I hate being embarrassed. And I notice for me, embarrassment is a big one that's connected to shame for me. Perfectionism can be another one. So it will look different for each of you. So it is kind of going back to that awareness for you of how does shame show up for you and what emotions for you are most tied to the shame. And the next question, and actually a couple
Alana,
people.
can I just touch on
Yeah.
that part real quick? Okay, so I just realized I talked about my deep shame. Like when I feel like deep, when I've been caught, right, in something. It could be by anybody, not just Alana, but something that I don't like about myself. But if I'm not caught and Alana says something like keyword, hey Luke, you seem off lately. Automatically that's defensiveness. That's like, are you serious? Are you kidding me? Like, look at all the good stuff that I'm doing. Like, I don't know, are you ever going to be satisfied with what I do in my life? I'll never be enough. So there is that, and that's just a lower level, and it's people aren't aware of it. So you're right, it shows up differently for different people.
Well, that's such a good example too, because what gets confusing sometimes is when I say, hey, Luke, I think you're off. I'm not shaming Luke, but Luke's shame is being triggered.
Mm-hmm.
So, me making that comment, and I say this because a lot of betrayed partners are either accused of shaming or afraid of triggering shame in their partner. But that was not shaming, but Luke's shame is being triggered. And the truth is his shame, I don't know which ways and how it's going to be triggered, but that's his responsibility. His shame is his responsibility to work out. And so somebody else saying something that triggers your shame is very different than they are shaming you. So I just want to highlight that difference.
What's somebody shaming you?
Shaming you could be more about I am attacking your character and who you are. So it is like that. You're good for nothing. You'll never figure this out. That would be shaming you versus you fell off. And then your brain interprets, I'm a good for nothing. I'll never figure this out.
This one's a hot topic. This one's a hot topic because I'm just thinking about all the people that have been betrayed here on this call. And I'm hoping that the person who betrayed them is very sensitive to the fact of this character stuff, because I recognize that in those trauma moments, when trauma is being triggered, there's a trauma response. There's a whole bunch of words that come out that aren't really the person themselves, but it's a trauma response. So, and I just want to say, like, character attacks aren't okay either. So it's a trauma response, and character attacks aren't okay. So it's like there's so much empathy that has to be given for the person that's going through trauma, but also recognizing if I'm going to learn how to if I'm going to gather my identity back, I have to feel differently about myself. So anyway, I know it's a little gray.
Well, when everything first came out, that is where I really learned to embrace swearing, which I still love to do to this day.
I love how you say that.
I do. I will own it. And there were things that I said and did that were so outside of my value system. And part of my healing work was taking responsibility for that and working towards being able to stay within my window of tolerance and stay within my value system. That being said, I knew I had that work to do, and I was working on that with my therapist. Luke coming to me and saying, you're doing this wrong or you're doing this wrong in your recovery was not helpful. So I love that you asked those who have been betrayed to be sensitive and gentle with their partners, because those trauma responses are real, and those going through trauma often feel like they are not themselves and they feel like they're going crazy. And as part of that work is learning how to stay within your window of tolerance.
Yeah.
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 Okay. So 2 questions come up with this from different people, but they're pretty similar. So what things can I do to not go into a shame cycle? And then the other person said, what practices do you recommend for when that shame pops up during interactions with myself?
Yeah, the first one, I might need these broken up again, Alana. The first one is I have to have things that I've placed in my mind to be able to anchor to. I notice a lot of men, it's really cool. They'll go to a place of like, I really, really want to show up for my wife in these moments. And I know this is when it's going to happen. And I know this is the type of stuff that I want to be saying, which is, if I were you, if I were in your shoes, I would be, and they already know what the emotion is because they talked to their wife about it. I would be angry. I would feel betrayed. I would feel hurt. And they go to a place of that empathy, not having it be about them, but seeking to understand what their spouse is. And that is something that is accessed because a part of the brain goes, okay, I know this is going to happen, and these are the words that I'm going to say, and this is how I'll get to those. That's how I'll get to this stuff. And it's something that another program talks about that I really like, which is the ability to protect the people that I love versus recognize them as the enemy. With Alana, like there's many times I've looked at her like when she's sharing emotion with me, like my natural thing is like she doesn't like me, and I start to view her as the enemy. An enemy's probably too strong, but I'm gonna leave it like that for a second. And then what I do is I go, I don't want that. She's not. And there's some key things that happen where I go from wanting to defend myself to all of a sudden wanting to have her back and going like, she is hurting right now and I'm going to attend to her and I want to show up for her. And I don't really give a crap what she throws at me because I'm very interested in her being taken care of right now. And it's a part that's accessed because it's planned before. And it's not easy.
Well, and a lot of times you can't do that in the moment. Like it takes a lot of work of doing our own individual work with a therapist to get to that place of really being able to do that in the way that you just described, Luke. Because I don't want women to hear that and go, oh my gosh, we're a year in. Why is he not showing up in that way? This really has been a journey of doing the work to get to those type of responses. But sometimes that means that you need to pull back, go get grounded, and then re-engage when you are more grounded. Because that shame, I love that someone used the shame spiral, because it can just start spinning you and you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And sometimes we have to be able to pull back, to re-regulate our body, to bring our heart rate down, to be able to think with clarity, then to be able to process of what is happening. Why am I going to this place? What's being triggered in me? And then to do all of that grounding, then to come back to the conversation, re-grounded and ready to engage.
Yeah.
So the other question is, what practices do you recommend for when shame pops up during interactions? And I would say practice grounding techniques, practice breathing, know when you need to pull back, be working on this stuff outside of conversations with your wife, be working on your shame, study any of Brene Brown's work. She has so many good books who talk about different elements of shame. I really like a good foundational one on Audible. It's a 4-hour, I don't know, like a webinar or something she did called Men, Women, and Worthiness. That one gives a great foundation for shame. What's the one, Luke, that you had pulled some of this out of?
Are you talking about Brene Brown? I thought it was just me.
Oh yeah, I thought it was just me.
But it isn't.
The Gifts of Imperfection. Those three, I would say, are really good foundations for even just understanding shame.
Yeah. Here's another one too. I'm always curious for y'all when the person that's betrayed learns concepts and tools that he's going to start to implement, does the person he's betrayed, does he share them with her, what he's going to be doing? So as he attempts to show up and have empathy, she's aware of what he's accomplishing at that moment. And that can feel a little silly, Because it's like, well, why would I tell her? I need to show up and just do it and surprise her, and she'll be, I don't know, thrilled with the fact that I'm empathetic. Don't do that. Let her know what you're valuing, which is to be empathetic, and this is how you're going to go about it. Alana, can you comment on that at all?
Well, someone put a comment in the chat that said, I find that leaning towards her and saying the words, I choose you over my shame works for me. And I like that because you're sending a message to yourself. You are verbalizing out loud that reminder of you want to choose her over your shame. And then it also sends a message to her that you're working to do the same. So I thought that was a great idea and thought.
What about this one, Alana? What's this like for you and the other women you've been around, which is him voicing his shame in the moment of him saying, hey, what I've noticed coming up with me is I'm wanting to attack, I'm wanting to defend, and I don't want to do that. And that's what's happening inside of me right now.
It depends on what energy it comes through. So we just talked about this in another group, but we talked about the energy. If the energy is, woe is me, here's all my shame, and it's so hard, and I need you to hold my shame and make space for it because it's so difficult for me, that's not helpful to the relationship. But if it's coming from a place of, like you had just said it, Luke, of I'm letting you in, this is what I'm working through, this is what's coming up, and I'm letting you see this so you know where I'm at and you can have this transparency. And that energy is, I'm holding it. I'm not asking you to hold any of it. This is just what I'm working through. Then that's very different. So in theory, yes, when it's done through this energy of not putting it on the partner who has been betrayed, because they have so much pain they already have to hold. And when you get triggered in your shame, and then now it becomes all about you instead of the partner that you've hurt, then that becomes problematic.
Thanks for that. Do you know
Okay.
where
Can I
we're
do
at?
the next
What's one more?
question?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so next question is why when I'm in a shame cycle do I take it out on my wife?
Self-protection, preserving self, that those feelings are so uncomfortable. That shame is so intense. It's drowning victim type of experience. Like if you're drowning in water, you'll take anybody down that's next to you that you can grab a hold of to not die. So it's a similar experience. You want to add to that?
Yeah, and I would say not only that, but sometimes she becomes your trigger, meaning her pain, the person that you betrayed, their pain is that reminder of the choices that you made, which then can trigger some of that own self-loathing or that own fill in the blank of those internal thoughts about yourself. So then she can feel like the enemy, or she can feel like the trigger. And so that also can be why you turn on her, which, we don't want to do. It isn't fair. It isn't right. And again, why it's so essential that we do our shame work so we can separate that.
Yeah.
Okay, next one. Is there something I can do or say to help my spouse understand that when he responds with shame to my feelings about what has happened, it makes it worse, other than just stating that or getting upset?
You want to hit this one?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of what we've been talking about. So I'm going to say that a little bit slower. What can I say or do to help him understand that when he responds with shame to my feelings about what has happened, it makes it worse? So right there is that when she has those hard feelings, what that's doing is that's triggering within him those feelings of, I'm such a fill in the blank of whatever they're internalizing your pain to be about them. And so with that, when all of a sudden they start making it about them and their pain, they're sending the message of, now my feelings are more important. Then there is often that defensiveness, which shuts them out, which abandons the person who's in pain. And then it moves away from the experience that the person is having that came with those feelings of pain. And then they're left without any of that empathy. Like we said before, at the very beginning, that shame blocks that empathy. So it is much more damaging to her. It leaves her abandoned, alone, and negated in her feelings, and becomes all about his feelings and his shame. So it can definitely have negative impacts on the relationship, which is why, why for relational healing, we really want to work on the shame. But that shame piece goes into why we mismanage feelings. That shame piece goes into why we are acting out. It feeds addiction and reinforces addiction. There's so many negative pieces that shame has that we want to weed out. And this is just one of the relational pieces.
Love that.
Now, I'm just curious, how many people are sitting here having shame for having shame? Like, if you betrayed your wife and you're sitting here and we're talking about all the shame, and you have shame coming up, and you're not responding well, like, how many of you are having shame for having shame? And if so, can I just say that you're normal? You're normal on the journey of trying to figure this out. And the fact that you're sitting here trying to figure it out and trying to learn, that's a big deal. And betrayed partners, your wife or your partner may not be in a place, and often isn't in a place, to celebrate that with you. And I say celebrate it in a way of give yourself credit for being here, but don't get caught up in that. Give yourself credit of, I'm trying to figure it out. I'm doing the work, and that's great. And keep your feet on the ground and keep working. So we have just a couple minutes left. Can we hit the two questions that came in that weren't around the shame? Do you want me to read it, or you?
Would you mind?
Okay. What is a realistic expectation for how a betrayed wife should show support for her husband? I have always thought that my role is to focus on my own healing, work on forgiveness, work on handling my triggers in a healthy way that is in line with my value system, make sure my husband has the time and space to work his recovery, and be willing to stay in the relationship while he works on recovery, and watch and wait for him to show consistency over time. This is a general idea of what I thought my role was in supporting my husband. However, my husband admits that I do these things, but still believes that I have not been supportive enough. He hasn't been clear about what more is expected, but is thinking about it. I would like some insight on how you feel a betrayed wife should show support to her husband. Is there more that is realistically expected that I'm not understanding?
Yeah, I'm kind of afraid to answer this because of missing context.
I know that's actually kind of where my thought went with this, is like, oh, there could be so many layers and levels to this that it feels a little scary to answer.
And by the way, nice work putting all the context that you did in there. So
Yeah.
we just recognize there's a lot to these experiences. So, and it's a really, really good question. So thank you. So all we can do is really speak in generalities. So I just want to speak in one of them. Okay, in the beginning part of the journey, which means he's working on his own stuff, she's working on her stuff. And then what's happened is he's now in a place where he's learned to understand his emotions and recognizing them and valuing them. And he has a process for when he gets emotionally hijacked, he can handle that. And when she's gone through fight, flight, or freeze and learned how to neutralize some of that, and also learn to, oh shoot, what's the word, Alana? She's worked through it, but she's learned to regulate. What's that?
Emotionally regulate.
Yeah, emotionally regulate. At that point in time, she's not responsible for anything. She's not responsible to be supportive. She's hurt. She's gone through it, and she's, literally had an attachment injury. And for her to support would only pull away from her getting healing. I mean, just picture the hospital bed, right? He's being attentive as far as showing up in the hospital, shows up every day after work, checks in on her, how she's doing. She's in her hospital bed. And he goes, hey, it'd be really nice if you could just maybe get out of bed for a moment and maybe give me a massage, because I've been sitting here for a really long time. That would be harmful to her healing, right? That would be super harmful to her healing. So we have to be careful. So what I'm really interested in for the man, that he understands what the supportive part looks like, and he works one-on-one with somebody to go, what am I needing my wife to provide for me? Because a lot of times what the men want is they want to have something that they had before, which is somebody that can build them up, but so much of that comes from within and is never going to be sustainable through their partner. That's generalities, okay?
Yeah, I think about when we were first going through this, and Luke would go to his therapist and talk about how I wasn't celebrating his wins enough and I wasn't giving him enough kudos. And I sat down with that therapist and I said to him, I said, I cannot give him kudos right now. And it wasn't necessarily because of my pain, but because Luke was such a validation junkie that he was so looking for that external validation and he couldn't do it for himself. And he was just trying to pull it from me and anyone else he could get it from. And that, to me, like, it felt like that would be really unhealthy and toxic for where we were in our relationship. And this was ours, right? This is not what everyone looks like. But me supporting him was being still in the relationship, not divorcing him yet, being willing to work on my own recovery, giving him room to work on his. And there were some other things too, like we would go on nightly walks together and we would try to connect as it felt safe. And this is after we came back from our separation. And there were other ways of trying to connect together, but him looking for me for support for him really was, he was looking for validation, and it was looking for that validation outside of himself because he hadn't learned to find it internally.
Yeah.
And I knew in my gut that it wasn't right for me yet to do that, but I didn't have the words to understand why. But there also did come a day and a time when he started to work on that I started learning of when it was wise for me to lean in and be supportive, and when it was wise for me to step back and go, you're really going through something right now. And I realize I can't do this for you. And I hope you figure it out. And I think you'll figure it out because I think you're an intelligent person.
Oh, I hated it when you said that.
Mm-hmm.
I hated it.
But there was times to step in and there was times to step back. And that was part of my own healing journey of learning when it was wise to do each.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about when it was time to start to lean into recognizing the good stuff that was going on, and when the therapist said, hey, you can go ahead and do that? Or do you want to leave it alone?
Well, it was as emotional safety was created, or an environment of safety was created. That was part of it. And then really it was situation to situation, but it was learning to tap into my own intuition and my own inner knowing. And there was times where I had that, and it wasn't a trauma brain, but it was more of this isn't mine to own. And I need to not do this for him. So there was times of stepping back, and there's times of, I really can support him and be by his side in this. And I think I can do it in a way that's not stepping into what's his, but I can also be here as an attachment and as a partner. But it really varied from time to time and situation to situation on where each of us were at and what I had ability for.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have one last question, then we'll try to hit with time. I told my husband about something that made me feel unsafe. He immediately went into a shame spiral and went to extremes of our relationship being an all or nothing situation. He claims that the last 2 months of good work was all for nothing. I asked him to leave our bedroom for the first time ever, and he threw a fit. We spent a week not talking because every time we try, it gets heated. So I've set boundaries that I can't engage when he's minimizing me. How do I handle this when he's like this?
We go first, Alana.
So the question is, how do I handle it when he's in a shame cycle and he's spinning? And the truth is you yourself cannot get him out of that shame cycle, that spiral. That is his work to do. And so what I heard in that is that you're having boundaries, and it sounds like maybe boundaries for the first time, and it's rocking his world a little bit. And it's okay to have empathy and compassion for that, but you might have to do it at a safe distance, where it sounds like you needed that, where you said, I asked him to leave our bedroom for the first time ever. That asking for that space, it sounds like you knew that you needed a little space. That all or nothing thinking is a cognitive distortion that happens a lot when we have, it happens a lot in general with people. There's about 10 main cognitive distortions. Look them up. They're interesting. But one is that black or white or all or nothing thinking. And so that's one place when somebody goes to shame that their brain can't go. And so what I hear in that is I hear that there are some fears in that the work that they have been doing doesn't matter and is all for nothing. Like those are fears coming up. And you could spend all the time in the world trying to convince them how those fears are not valid or not right. But it's their own stuff right here that's being triggered. So I would highly suggest, if it's safe enough to talk about this in a couples session, great. If it's not, this is really good work for him to work through in his own individual of what's coming up. Why is her boundary so scary to you? Because boundaries, while initially they can feel really threatening and feel like big walls, boundaries actually give the relationship an opportunity to become closer and to heal. And so I hear in that, that the boundary is when I'm feeling minimized, then I need to create a little emotional safety for myself. And that's really healthy to be able to do that. And when we have boundaries, we don't get to control the outcome of how they respond to that. And so his response does not mean your boundary was right or wrong or good or bad, meaning when he is spinning with your boundary, your responsibility is just to be clear and kind with your boundary, hold the boundary as you need it for your own safety, but then do your own grounding work and continue to create your own safety so you can handle whatever spin that they're going through. You want to add anything to that?
I just want to say yes. And the amount of, it's sad when you would put up a boundary in the very beginning and I would make it about me instead of you doing something very, very vulnerable and trying to create safety for yourself. And I would make it like it was your problem. So yeah, some feelings there. Okay, I guess we can go ahead and wrap up, right?
Yeah, I think I know we still had a couple of the shame ones unanswered, but I think in roundabout ways we got to most of them. So if you have topic requests for next month, let us know. And if you want to learn more about that compartmentalizing, if you're a male and you're not in a 180 group, join a 180 group, because that is going to be coming down the line, the compartmentalization. And just thanks for hanging out with us tonight. When you sit down and you're trying to learn and grow and you're committed to your recovery, it's not a little thing. And it goes beyond, so much beyond you. As you tackle these things and heal them for yourself, you will share and spread that healing among others. So thanks for hanging out with us tonight, and we'll see you all next month.
Have a good night, everybody.